The only answer to that is Bitcoin. It actually has the properties of perfect money. It's the first hard asset that is not inflationary, but actually deflationary. It has a 21 million hard cap supply that's going down every single day. So you compare that versus gold, which is the closest thing we've ever had to a true hard money. But gold, as its prices rise, it creates incentive for more mining activity to happen. So gold is the most known hard asset, but Bitcoin's infinitely divisible. You can actually store it in your mind. Good luck carrying a massive brick of gold somewhere, but if you can store something in your mind, you can literally take it anywhere. So it actually gives back the power to the people.
Welcome to the Academy on Capitalism's YouTube channel. If you like this show, please hit like and make sure to subscribe because we have some great interviews coming for you, and you've tuned into one of the best today. We are here with Matt Cole, CEO and chairman of Strive. We're going to ask Matt some questions about investing, and I think we should just get into it. Pleasure to see you today, Matt.
Thanks for having me.
You're welcome. So here's what I'd like to start off with. At one time, investing was just seen as profit maximizing, sort of convention. Now, investing is seen as a social activist project. How has this affected investors? And would it be correct to say that Strive's investing for the highest returns is itself now a form of social activism?
Yeah, so there was a lot of confusion and growing confusion, I think, post-Great Financial Crisis about what is the purpose of a for-profit corporation. And so historically, probably for most of your career, when I was growing up, when I was going to college, it was pretty clear that a for-profit corporation exists to, within the law, ethically maximize value for investors. That is fiduciary duty. And it was encoded in law, in Delaware law, actually way back in the day, in the case with Dodge versus Ford, that set the foundation for American capitalism, that amongst all of the different stakeholders around a business, whether it's customers, employees, governments, that one matters the most, and it's the shareholder. And so to use a biblical analogy, there's a biblical analogy that says you cannot serve two masters. You have to actually pick a master, and that for a for-profit company, the master is the shareholder. In Europe, for many decades, that has not been the case, and the returns have been abysmal because of that. And so just to touch on the returns real quick, in Europe, over the last 40 plus years, on average, European stocks underperform American stocks by over 3% per year. And that compounds over the course of one's career. So if you think a career, you start working when you're in your 20s, you're retiring in your 60s. So a 40-year career, a 3% return compounds to an over 2,000% difference. So a 20x difference. And so if you start to think about retirement security, a 20x difference is the ability to be able to afford to retire or not be able to afford to retire with prosperity. And so that is why this matters. That is why capitalism matters. That's why it lifts the boats of the individuals of America itself, right? And so that was, I think, non-controversial. And then about 10-ish years ago, it started to become controversial. And so I started my career at CalPERS. I was there for 16 years, which is probably the most liberal investment shop in the country, at least from the board level down, because the board is majority appointed by the governor's office. But the investment staff, I would say, were mostly fiduciaries. But it became a question to say, we should actually be pushing social causes. And so my belief is that I care about a lot of social causes myself, as I'm sure you do, as I'm sure most of your listeners do. And I'm sure, maybe on this channel, maybe we agree on a lot of them, but I think that almost is irrelevant. That, for me, like the most important social cause is my Christian faith. And I spend a lot of my personal money promoting that. I pay tithes, but I don't believe Strive as a for-profit corporation, its mission is not to pursue that personal faith. It actually is to, as an employee of Strive, and obviously I'm the CEO of the company, but whether you're the CEO or whether you're, the intern, that it's not to pursue those personal causes, but to actually employ and pay those individuals to pursue those personal causes on their own in their own personal lives. And so my belief is by depoliticizing corporations, you actually allow democracy to flourish and give the individuals the power to push the social causes that they want while the company remains focused on its mission.
Oh, Excellent. You talked about Europe being 20x returns compounded over 40 years lower than the United States. Have you seen this European influence? And you may have said it with the CalPERS, but I want to really draw that out. Have you seen this influence for lower returns through social activism happening in the United States as well?
Mhm. Yeah, so I think the Europe versus America example is what happens when at every single level of the stack, so at the regulation level, so regulation in Europe versus regulation in America, at the corporate purpose level, and at the individual level, when you have a different view of capitalism. So their view would be stakeholder capitalism, right? Which is there is no one master, all stakeholders are equal, which is a confusing thing that actually just like can't actually work in reality as we've stated. And you see that influence into corporate America. So explicitly, the EU has put mandates on American corporations that they must comply by
Oh,
ESG regulations in the United States. And so in the early days of Strive, when we were pushing back against corporations in America, saying, why are you involved in this environmental, activism that will directly harm your company? And they would say, well, if we don't do this, Europe will not allow us access to the markets. And so one response, there's many responses, but one interesting response was, this is effectively a tax on our business that we have to pay, and we actually make more profit by constraining ourselves, even in America, by complying by these European regulations. Well, that led us to go directly to the federal government and say, do you want the European regulators to be over-regulating American companies' operations in America? That is a problem. And now you've seen the Trump administration really punch back against Europe on that, and I'm really glad to see that. The other thing we saw from corporations was some version of, we don't really agree with this, but we kind of can't say that publicly. And that to me is how I think you saw the house of cards that is and was ESG and DEI, and why you're able to see it crumble very quickly when an administration comes in and punishes it, because I don't think you had very many true believers.
okay. Interesting. Thank you. We had a discussion before this interview, and you had a very interesting distinction between productive and unproductive ways to achieve one's goals, even social goals. Could you elaborate for our viewers what that distinction is and how you see it?
Yeah, so look, I love going to places where people disagree with me and understanding the best versions of the arguments and actually having a productive conversation. So a lot of younger people specifically, they really care about environmental act. I love nature. I love going hiking. I love just being out there. So I care about environmentalism as well. And so it's like, okay, well, we agree that we care about the environment. We agree that we care about things like clean water, preserving, clean water, clean air for future generations. We might disagree on, some of the impacts and potential catastrophes of climate change, but there's a lot that we agree on. So okay, you have that energy, you have that passion. There's two different ways that you can use that passion. One is you can use it to try to shut down companies that you don't like. So shut down Exxon, shut down Chevron, and say, we're going to shut down gas-powered cars in America. And that is a very unproductive way to take that passion. It directly harms the economy. And they might say, well, the benefit to the environment is greater than the harm in the economy. But I don't think people could really argue that it doesn't have a negative impact on the economy and also on those companies. The alternative is to say, take that energy and actually innovate, lean into capitalism and say, hey, if I have this energy and others have this energy, I'm going to provide a solution. And if the solution from some of the younger minds, smartest minds in America is better than what exists, I have no problem going to a better solution. I don't care. No matter what the sector is that we're talking about, and you're not constraining, you're actually replacing not by force, but by freedom. And I think that is what is empowering. That is actually what drives lasting change that is less contentious and less partisan.
And that takes us to the next question I want to ask. So, students pursuing or people pursuing activism, is there a way that we could teach business better by maybe teaching capitalism better, or teaching capitalism better by teaching business better? What should we be reaching students with so that they can come out and be better entrepreneurs and innovators and choose the productive over the unproductive?
I can resonate with many people that feel like capitalism hasn't worked for them in the country, in this country today. And I think that is a very common feeling post Great Financial Crisis, where businesses that should have gone out of business were saved. There's been crony capitalism, and really a system where financial assets have done really good and the wealthy have done really, really good, but the average American has not done well in this. And home prices have gone up, they've become very unaffordable. And so it's easy to see how a young person can say, capitalism doesn't work. It doesn't work for me. I'm worse off. And obviously, the government's printing money. And so I think how we can teach capitalism better is to create a system where more people are participating in. So I like ideas that are coming up right now, like for kids that are born, that they start with a savings account that's invested in the stock market. Well, now they're directly participating from birth in the growing of the economy. And so these are, and I say this in a good way, like Trojan horse to get people to see the upside, how something can benefit from them by actually giving ownership. And that's not, universal basic income or anything. It's just a small savings account that shows people that this works, and then get them to think, okay, how does this work for me versus it's me versus the other side.
Interesting. Kind of mirrors like a deposit on your rental that gives
Yes.
you a stake in its well-being.
Hmm.
I hadn't thought of that. Continuing along this line about connecting students' education with the practice of capitalism and the defense of capitalism. Strive is building a public Bitcoin treasury, if I'm getting that correctly. And do you think this is a lesson in monetary theory that students should be learned? People argue that Bitcoin's a bubble and only value because others want it, but isn't that true of money in general? And so what is it about Bitcoin that makes it a really good investment? And what is it about money that maybe we want to put it away and get returns for it?
Yeah. So before making the argument for Bitcoin, I think it's important to understand the problem of fiat currencies. And so
Mhm.
most fiat currencies throughout history have a lifespan of about 80 to 100 years. The dollar, post being backed by the gold standard, is approaching that kind of lifespan. And now it doesn't mean that it can't last longer. And I think as Americans, it's definitely in all of our interests, including mine as a Bitcoiner, to preserve dollar dominance. But what I want to believe is true with dollar dominance is also has to be met with facts, and the facts of the debt crisis, the facts that it is bipartisan in this country to increase the deficit, that fiscal conservatism is not happening. And my hope was that Doge was going to come in and slash government spending, that we would take a real approach to reduce the deficit, but that's just not what we see. So with that as reality, my view is that the dollar and other fiat currencies, but the dollar as a reserve currency has the most to lose, are going to continually be debased. And that's a viewpoint that I've had since 2017. The debasement trade has now become popular in Wall Street circles, with gold rising to new all-time highs. But the question becomes, okay, if fiat currencies are being debased, what is the best solution in our digital economy? And my belief is that the only answer to that is Bitcoin, that it actually has the properties of perfect money. It's the first hard asset that actually is not inflationary, but actually deflationary. It has a 21 million hard cap supply, but the reality is that coins are lost every single day. So the actual true supply cap is going down every single day. So you compare that versus gold, which is the closest thing we've ever had to a true hard money, but gold, as its prices rise, it creates incentive for more mining activity to happen. So the inflation rate of the circulating gold can go up or down with the price of gold. And you see things like these, you know, asteroids in space that have more gold supply than have ever existed. I say, well, that seems silly, but you think about some of the technological advancements, if gold goes high enough, it's not actually silly that some of that gold could even be brought back to the United States in the future. So gold is, I say, the most known asset, but Bitcoin's infinitely divisible. You can actually store it in your mind. And so even when we talk about some of these fights against capitalism, against freedom, good luck carrying a massive brick of gold somewhere if someone wants to stop you. But if you can store something in your mind, you can literally take it anywhere. So it actually gives back the power to the people. And I think that, like some of the other arguments we're making around capitalism and how do you promote it by giving people a stake in the system, that if you that we're actually in a Bitcoin treasury company actually putting Bitcoin exposure into the portfolios of everyday Americans, because it's a publicly traded stock. It's actually owned in indexes. So Vanguard, as an example, is one of our largest shareholders.
Mm.
So many people that own Vanguard index funds have exposure to our Bitcoin treasury company. So they actually have a vested interest in the future price of Bitcoin. And I don't mean this in like a negative connotation, but that as a Trojan horse gets people to care. Like if you give people exposure to the S&P 500, they're going to care about the stock market. You put a Bitcoin treasury company in people's portfolios, they're going to care about Bitcoin. And then once you start caring and participating in the upside, then that's how you can really create long run, lasting, permanent support for the asset.
I would assume both in terms of political and in terms of holding it as a store of value. Is that correct?
Yes, absolutely.
Well, excellent. No, thank you very much. Thank you for that. There's a lot to learn for what you said. I wish I had more time to talk with you, but I want to thank you for being here. Did you have anything that you wanted to close with?
No, I guess the last thing I would close with is that for those that are newer to Bitcoin, I hope you're skeptical. I was skeptical. I didn't hear about Bitcoin and become a Bitcoiner. It took me actually a couple of years. It took me to do the research. And as I did the research and understood the asset, what I've learned that I didn't understand at the time is that it's a true savings vehicle. And so as a true savings vehicle, if you remove the word Bitcoin, if you just say it's a true savings vehicle, you would just want to have exposure to it. You're not concerned about selling or riding at the volatility. You just want to own it over the long run. And when you look at Bitcoin's returns, it's volatile, but there is literally not a single 4-year period in Bitcoin's history that's had a negative return. And so when you zoom out and you understand it, then you can think about it the correct way as a long duration asset, not a get rich quick scheme, which I think a lot of people think about it of. And I think that leads to the negative outcomes that I think are completely avoidable.
All right. Well, thank you. Thank you, Matt, for joining us.
Thanks, Bill.
Thank you. And thank you for joining us. If you've enjoyed this video, once again, make sure that you hit the like or the subscribe button and check out the other videos we have on our channel where we tie in learning about capitalism and learning about business. Thank you very much. Have a good day.